This is Jona Rechnitz, a 42-year-old man who seems to be doing well in life. He owns a Bugatti, lives in a mansion, and is friends with some of the biggest celebrities in the world. But Jona is also a man who has committed a countless number of crimes. He's bribed police officers, stolen million-dollar pieces of jewelry, extorted and blackmailed people suing him, scammed the celebrities he hung out with, and ran multiple other scams swindling people out of over $45 million. And yet, he's never served a single day in prison. So how did this convicted felon avoid any punishment for his crimes? And how did he even get to this stature of life in the first place? Well, Jona was born into a rich Orthodox Jewish family in California in 1982. Growing up, he went to multiple nice private schools like Yeshiva University LA and New York's Yeshiva University. After graduating, he wifed up his girlfriend Rachel and followed his dad, Robert, into real estate. By '07, he had an honest job at the US branch of real estate development firm Africa Israel Investments in New York City and climbed the ladder to become the company's director of acquisitions. So far, everything is normal. He's just a guy who was dealt a nice hand in life and was using it wisely. Well, that was until he saw a license plate. And no, not just a random license plate with some goofy ass catchphrase on it. A license plate that was marked sheriff. You see, one day Jona noticed one of his clients was parking anywhere he wanted, in front of street cleaning signs, bus stops, fire hydrants, hell, even no parking signs. And he could get away with all of this thanks to his special sheriff plates on his car. Now Jona thought this guy was just a huge dick, but he also was intrigued with the idea of getting primo parking anytime he wanted. The client ended up introducing him to the man who got him the plates, Jeremy Reichberg, a man who owned a consulting business but was better known for having a great connection with the New York Police Department. He even had business cards that read NYPD Liaison on it.
Liaison.
Which seems like a horrible idea, but Jona couldn't care less about his pieces of cardboard. Instead, he was interested in getting in touch with the cops and snagging a handicap parking card on crack. He was successful in doing so when he spent $5,000 on a ticket to a benefit Jeremy was hosting for the NYPD's football team. But this would be far from the only time Jona did a favor for these people. After the benefit, Jona and Jeremy became great friends and bonded over glazing the NYPD in exchange to look good professionally and personally. They went on a tear bribing police officers. I'm talking flying officers on private jets to the Super Bowl, bankrolling their stays at casinos, getting them escorts at said casinos, buying their families Christmas gifts, and paying for their vacation. But there was one police officer in particular who got glazed a little too hard. This is Norman Seabrook, the president of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, a union for New York City's jail guards. You see, Norman had a problem that many people deal with on a daily basis. He wished he had more money. Now, as luck would have it, during a nice evening with Jona, Jeremy, and Philip Banks, a soon-to-be high-ranking official on the force who was in bed with the duo, Norman spilled all of his problems. And the boys were more than happy to help out. Jona connected Norman to an old family friend named Murray Huberfield, founder of hedge fund Platinum Partners, and came up with a genius business idea. If COBA, the union Norman oversaw, would invest their money with Murray into PP, Norman would get a kickback from any of the profits COBA's money generated. Murray thought, sure, I like free money, and gladly accepted $20 million from COBA, a mistake that Norman and Murray would regret forever. As a part of the deal, this $20 million investment meant Norman was owed $60,000. To get him the money faster, Jona pulled his cash from his own savings, stuffed it in a designer bag, and planned to hand it off to Norman on a cold December day in 2014. And the plan went through just fine, except for the fact that law enforcement saw this whole thing go down. For over 2 years since that day, investigators broke down what was known as the biggest modern corruption scandal in New York City and gave out punishments to who deserved them. Norman was sentenced to 58 months in prison in order to pay $19 million in restitution to COBA. Jeremy caught 48 months in prison. Murray earned 30 months and also had to pay $19 million jointly with Norman. And Philip got nothing because he resigned days before his big promotion. Definitely not suspicious at all. But Jona, well, he got nothing at all. And he didn't even have to abruptly quit his job to do so. Instead, he turned into quite possibly the biggest snitch of all time, cooperating with investigators and the NYPD on outlining every part of his and Jeremy's bribing scheme. What a great friend. However, as a part of his cooperating agreement, he pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud aka bribing police, in awaited sentencing. So what did he do after absolutely tarnishing his name in New York? Well, he flew back to his home state of California in 2017 to start another scheme, one that would give him vast connections people dreamed of, an insanely luxurious lifestyle, and a bunch of people that wanted him to rot in prison forever. But before he did all of that, he needed a place to stay. I mean, he did have a wife and 6 children that needed beds, so he turned to the Jewish community for help. A local real estate broker from the community suggested a home owned by Joe Englenoff, who was a big-time developer. But Joe wasn't fond of Jonah's past. But thanks to Jonah's daddy talking with Joe's father, Abraham, Abe asked his son to, quote, find it in your heart to give him a second chance, because he's trying to move out here to California from New York. He's reformed. Joe bought this and let Jonah rent out his mansion for $17,000 a month. Nestled in his nice new crib, Jonah now had time to start his next venture, Jadel Jewelry and Diamonds. It's exactly what it sounds like. Jonah was going to sell high-end diamonds and jewelry to rich people. But how would he get diamonds and find rich people to sell them to? Well, surprisingly, finding the rich people was the easy part. Jonah would buy courtside tickets to NBA games and be surrounded by wealthy clients and celebrities. And using his networking skills he mastered in New York real estate, he easily picked up some big names like Shaq, Justin Bieber, the Kardashians, Floyd Mayweather Jr., and more. So that's great, but he still didn't have anything to sell them, which is why Jonah utilized his networking skills again, but this time with other diamond dealers. He would bust down the front doors of surrounding jewelry stores and find owners who would lend him their jewelry on consignment. Now, something to note about the diamond industry is that it's largely based on trust. A lot of deals are done on consignment or memo, which work like this. Jonah would take some jewelry from someone else and try to sell it for more than what that person was selling for it, say for $1 million. If Jonah sold it for more, let's say 1.5, Jonah would keep the $500,000 profit and give the rest back to the original person. I mean, to me, doing handshake deals for products that are worth millions of dollars is absolutely bizarre, but he made it work. Jonah did a lot of these deals with a man named Peter Vutzis, over 30 to be exact, totaling $39.4 million from those stars he roped in from those courtside seats. Shit, Joe's dad might have been right. Jonah was doing legit deals and clearly making great money, and it really did seem like Jonah was reformed. But just as things were heating up with Jadel, Jonah had to fly back to New York for his sentencing. Back in the Big Apple, Jonah was pinning his hair back, begging the judge to let him off easy for his police bribing. And he had backup too. His father, his wife, his landlord, and more were all there to give supportive statements to try and convince the judge that Jonah was a changed man. However, none of this stuck whatsoever. The judge said, quote, he cheapens people. He works on their insecurities and their quest for material possessions and just does the opposite. He diminishes people. So much for trying to blow him. Judge Alan Hellerstein sentenced Jonah to 5 months in prison and 5 months of house arrest, along with a $10 million restitution payment to Koba. But this didn't mean much at the moment, as all Jonah had to do was appeal this decision and pay his bail. And just like that, he was free to fly back to LA to continue growing Jadel. But things weren't so great back in the Golden State either. Now, this wouldn't be the case if Jonah was actually honest about being a changed man and reinventing himself. But that wasn't the case. A little while into his relationship with Jonah, Peter started to realize that some of his jewelry he gave to Jonah wasn't being sold for months. In addition, he'd received panicked text messages from Jonah when confronted about this, where he admitted to a huge crisis and a legal situation because a client didn't know about my legal situation and freaked out and wanted to reverse previous transactions. Well, after some very light digging, Peter found out that Jonah was instead pawning his jewelry for $1 million cash loans. And even worse, he wasn't the only victim of this nonsense. Tons of other jewelers who loaned him pieces were also not being paid their millions upon millions of dollars on time. Not only because Jonah was taking their products to pawn shops, but because he was also using their pieces as collateral to get business loans for Jadel. Of course, Peter and all of the other jewelers Jonah swindled filed lawsuits against him for this bullshit. In total, they claimed that $15.5 million were lost, and they even tried to get Jadel to file for bankruptcy so they could reclaim their assets faster. But by some miracle, Jonah was bailed out of his shit yet again. The bankruptcy trustee overseeing Jadel's case moved to dismiss it because it was, quote, unlikely to generate any financial recoveries, resulting in a relatively minuscule settlement payment of $215K. Now, you'd think after bribing the police and stealing millions of dollars in jewelry and money, Jonah would look at himself in the mirror and realize the absolute parasite he's become. These were serious financial crimes he was committing, so surely he was done after these. No, bribing police wasn't enough. Scamming people out of millions of dollars in jewelry wasn't enough. No, he wanted to endure yet another venture to make some serious money from. And he knew just the right person to start it with. Do you remember this guy from earlier? You know, one of the best boxers of all time that bought jewelry from Jona? Well, Floyd Mayweather Jr. also wanted to make some bread, and he, for reasons I cannot fathom, trusted Jona and partnered with him on setting up a huge boxing event that would surely make them rich, fighting Logan Paul.
I think there's someone hanging right there.
Yes, Jona was a part of the 2021 boxing match between one of the GOATs of the sport and former douchebag Viner, and he was involved in a big way. Jona essentially acted as Floyd's agent, becoming a spokesperson for him, buying luxury items on his behalf, and most important, offering ticket investment opportunities on his behalf. For the upcoming fight, Jona had a plan to take $1 million in investments for tickets for the event, sell them up to 10 times their value, and give whoever invested in them 25% of the profits. And who would be the lucky man or woman stupid enough to do business with this guy? None other than his own landlord, Joe Englenoff. After long back and forth combos, Jona convinced Joe to invest $1.4 million in this ticket opportunity, which in Joe's defense may have seemed like a fine deal considering he hadn't been scammed by Jona yet. Big emphasis on yet. On June 6, 2021, Joe flew to Miami for the fight. As expected, Joe and millions of people around the world had to endure a god-awful 8 rounds of fighting, if you could even call it that. But the action didn't matter much to Joe, Jona, or even Floyd because the money sure as hell came in. Floyd himself made an estimated $25 million from the event, and both Joe and Jona made a killing off the ticket sales. And for once in his entire life so far, it looked like Jona finally did a legit, fair business deal where himself and his partners made money. But Jona got too greedy. A month after the fight, Joe hadn't received his money back. Being suspicious, he went to Jona face to face to see what the deal was, only to hear that Jona, on Joe's behalf, took his money and reinvested it into a second boxing match. Joe obviously was furious at this decision. I mean, this is over $1 million Jona essentially stole from him, and he wanted his money now. However, Jona used a bunch of excuses and sweet-talked his way into a written agreement with Joe. He would reinvest in the second fight, but be guaranteed $4.9 million, which was the initial investment plus the profits from the Mayweather fight, no later than September 6, 16 days after the second fight. Well, the fight happened, the 16 days had passed, and surprise, Joe didn't have a dime of his money back. Joe angrily emailed Jona demanding that he be paid ASAP, but was yet again met with resistance. It turns out the ticket sales for the second fight weren't as high as Jona expected, and he didn't want to pay Joe back quite yet because he had plans to invest his money again in a third fight. Joe was immensely pissed at this point, and the thought of him never getting his money back started to slowly creep up on him. But those thoughts quickly went away when Jona's dad, once again showing up for his shitty son, swore on a Torah in front of Joe that he himself would guarantee a now $5.7 million payment for his new investment. Now surely this would be the end of the bullshit, right? You now have two people swearing that Joe would be made whole. Well, that fight also failed, and when it came time for Joe to get his money, he was met with some awesome news that his cash would be dumped into, I shit you not, a fourth fight. That's 4 fights Joe's money was invested in without his knowledge, and by this point he just knew his money was gone. So why in the hell did Jona not pay Joe back after the first fight? It was the only successful event they invested in, and they both would have made millions. Well, that's because Jona was dealing with yet another scam he was a part of that I haven't mentioned yet. A shitcoin rug pull. Did y'all notice this big logo on Mayweather's boxer shorts while he was running away from Logan bear hugging him? Well, that was the logo of Ethereum Max, the exclusive cryptocurrency accepted for online ticket purchasing for the event. And Floyd wasn't the only celebrity endorsing it. Paul Pierce, Antonio Brown, French Montana, and Kim Kardashian were just a few of the laundry list of A-listers Jona paid to promote the coin he had a majority ownership in. And with all classic rug pulls, the second these endorsements went live to their fans and the price shot up, Jona began liquidating hard. He made hundreds of thousands of dollars from selling EMAX tokens when the currency was at its peak price, driving the price of the coin down by 93% in just 2 months and inevitably fucking over all of the fans that invested in it. Thankfully, this suspicious bombing of the price led 10 people to file a lawsuit against the company and have them investigated for making false and misleading statements to investors. And speaking of investors, Joe finally had enough of Jona's bullshit, especially after seeing this news about the shitcoin, and decided to get a little sweet revenge of his own. After 8 months of waiting for his money, Joe finally filed a lawsuit against both Jona and Floyd for breach of contract, asking for a $15 million payday. But Jona wasn't gonna let this lawsuit deter him. Shit, I mean, I'm losing track of the amount of people that sued him, so clearly Jona knows how to avoid these legal battles. But out of all of these lawsuits filed, Jona's feud with Joe stuck out in particular, mainly because Joe was threatened non-stop by Jona. On February 7th, 2022, less than a week after Joe filed, he was walking out of his office when 2 large men pulled up on him and said, "We're sent here by Jona. You're fucking with the wrong guy." Okay, definitely not called for, but these threats only got worse. Jona threatened Joe's wife while she was in front of his house, saying he was gonna get ugly quick with her. He yelled at Joe's 15-year-old son in a restaurant he was at, making a threatening gesture toward him and saying, "Do you have something to say to me?" And that wasn't the end of it either. He even sent henchmen to approach Joe's 20-year-old daughter in a parking lot, and more guys to come scream at him and his wife in a sushi restaurant, yelling, "Hey, you tax cheat. Hey, Floyd's gonna fuck you up. Jona's gonna fuck you up." Yeah, just little over the top. Now, as everyone would in this situation, Joe filed a restraining order against Jona and even took some of these threats to the FBI. But just after submitting all of that info, some good news finally crossed his table. So this is Victor Noble, yet another rich real estate investor, but more notably another one of Jona's victims. Victor was one of those guys who accepted Jona's jewelry as collateral for a business loan way back in the Jadell days, giving Jona a $2.9 million loan with an insane 9% interest rate. Yes, that deal was scummy as fuck, but Jona agreed to it and, surprise surprise, never paid Victor back. By the summer of 23, he was owed $17.7 million and, you guessed it, filed a lawsuit against Jona. Except in this case, something extremely rare happened. Jona lost it. The scumbag was finally ordered by the court to pay one of his victims what they were owed. Of course, Jona didn't go down without a fight, claiming that he didn't have the money to pay Victor back. But okay, what does this situation have to do with Joe at all? Well, Joe and Victor both had the same lawyer, and because Victor now needed to file a shit ton of subpoenas against Jona, which would take a lot of time and money, plus he was dealing with some legal trouble of his own, the three hashed out a deal. Joe would buy a controlling interest in Victor's settlement money, meaning he would get a majority chunk of it, and in return would do all of the dirty work with filing subpoenas to prove that Jona had the money to pay them back. He set up a collection company hilariously called Pay Up JR to be the official entity to be paid out, and went off to make things right once and for all. But was he successful at doing so? And what about the countless other lawsuits against Jona? Like, how did those turn out? Well, if you were a psycho rooting for Jona this whole time, they went great. Peter, along with all the other jewelers that did business with Jona, quietly settled all of their cases. The 10 Ethereum Max investors didn't get much satisfaction, as Jona was never fined by the SEC while the celebrities promoting it did. And Joe is yet to win his lawsuit for the ticket scandal or get any of Jona's money from Victor's case. But worst of all, for the one crime that Jona pled guilty to, he's gotten off ridiculously easy for it. The federal appeals court ended up overturning his original sentence for bribing the police, as coincidentally, the judge had some potential conflict of interest due to a close relationship from someone at Platinum Partners. A new judge was assigned to the case, and they significantly cut down Jona's COBA payment to $891K, a massive decrease from what it was before. And to this day, Jona hasn't served a single day in prison for this case or any of the cases against him. However, that doesn't mean all hope is lost. Some of the big cases are still ongoing, such as the Max suit, Joe's ticketing suit, and the bribing police suit. There's still a decent chance Jona finally goes behind bars for his actions. But as of now, he's still a free man even after stealing an estimated $45 million in jewelry and money, extorting, blackmailing, and threatening people, running multiple scams, and bribing one of the largest police departments in the US. Also, this video was largely based on the amazing article written by Miranda Green titled All That Glitters. The link to it is in the description. If you're looking for another story about a scumbag scammer, check out my video on Rudy Kurniawan, a man who ran a $35 million counterfeit wine scam.